happy to be your MC tonight. I'm so happy to be a co-host to host Steven Olikara. I'm just so thankful that you all took the time to come. I'm hearing so many good things about you sharing the word of Steven Olikara, and I'm hearing so much that people are like, you know what? I'm just going to vote for him. I don't know that I need to come because like everyone I care about and I believe the same things, like I'm just going to hang with that. And so we're just really happy also you came to support him and you came out. I'd like to really thank my fellow host committee members, if you guys don't mind just kind of coming up here. So it's Courtney and Joe Feldhausen. Come on up. Woo! And Pam Belden. And they're going to be helping throughout the night with other portions, and they've been helping all the way through. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And also our co-host is our former Lieutenant Governor, Barbara Lawton. And she, of course, is endorsing Steven. And I'm just going to say a few words, and then I get to introduce her to you officially. And she's going to say a few words, and then she will get to introduce Steven. And then Steven really is going to say some things, and then he really wants to hear your questions. And I'm going to tell you, because I've seen him in action, that there is nothing you can't ask him, and he's brilliant. So there's nothing he doesn't also have an answer for. So first I want to tell you a little bit about how I got to know Steven. I have had the pleasure to spend, a personal time with him. And I just feel like tearing. Well, he was at my home for Christmas, and I'm just going to say he's dating Stephanie. But I will say that I feel like it's such a gift that I've gotten to spend time with him. And strangely, Steven, unbeknownst to you, I have been spending a lot of time with Steven, like all his information online. I've spent time with Steven. He's one of the featured amazing humans in a documentary that was co-produced by Meghan McCain, and it's called The Reunited States. And when you watch that, you will see, like, I've talked with Steven, I've heard his conviction, I've heard people question him, and he is just like, and then he gives you this answer that makes you go, oh, somebody gets it. And so what I'm excited for you all to feel right now is that I'm going to tell you personally in the last 5 years, well, actually it started back in 2011 with the whole teacher union, and then we all felt like we were crap. And then, but more recently, it's been hard, and I've been scared and angry. And the more time I spend with Steven, with his message, the more I feel inspired. I feel calm about our future. You watch The Reunited States. Steven had started an organization called the Millennial Action Project, and you'll learn more about it. I really would like you to watch that so you can speak to that to other people. And I want you to know that Steven has helped pass or wrote more legislation than anyone, and you get to say it later, than anyone who's running. And so he may be younger, but he's got more experience at making a difference than anyone out there. And so it's just so exciting that you're a part of this. It's early days, right? We got more stuff coming. I hope you feel inspired. And what I get to do now is I get to introduce the fabulous, well, hey, wait, you gotta know what he's running for. He is running for U.S. Senator for the state of Wisconsin. The person who currently holds that is Ron Johnson. So we are probably somewhat of like mind in terms of wanting a change. And so what's exciting is that this is a large Democratic PAC right now, and we want you to support Steven and get that word out to have him rise. So you get to learn about him and see if he's a fit for you too. And I know he will be. So I get to introduce, Barbara Lawton is our two-time as our lieutenant governor with Governor Doyle. She is currently a trustee of Lawrence University. She serves on the advisory boards of the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service, She's an Oxfam America's Sisters on the Planet initiative, and as honorary co-chair of Law Forward, she co-founded Issue One, a cross-partisan political reform organization based in Washington, D.C.
I'm going to tell you something now that is not because of this moment. This is so deeply held and so profound. And if my husband were here, he would tell you this too. And I have been engaged in politics and electoral politics for decades. And I have never had the privilege of supporting such a well-prepared and truly fine candidate with a vision for governance in our country or city, from school board to city council to President of the United States. I have never had the privilege of supporting a candidate like Steven. And I say that even though there's another candidate running who I feel very close to. So this is one of those moments. I'm saying it out loud, and I say it at every opportunity because, precisely as Carol said, we're in a precarious moment in our nation. And when you know that somebody has the experience and the accomplishments and the capacity to make a change, not only represent us well and on our behalf for the issues that matter to us in Wisconsin, but to really be viral in the culture of the U.S. Senate, which is imperative. So I'll just quickly say that Millennial Action Project, Steven had just graduated from college. I've known him since he was an undergrad. And I was lieutenant governor, and he's asking me to come into these unimagined new coalitions that are groups that are doing interesting things. He's got an imagination, but he's an entrepreneur. And he founded this organization right after college, a nonprofit from nothing. If any of you have worked with or tried to start a nonprofit, going from zero to I don't know how many $1 million in 5 years is a huge accomplishment. And what he did was bring together millennial-aged leaders who said, we're not going to wait a generation until it's our turn to have an impact on the gridlock in Washington, D.C. And brought them together from both parties in Washington, D.C. for a future caucus, and in 30-some states now, 31, 32 states, including Wisconsin. It took them, we were number 21, getting over our legislature to find millennial-age people. But this attracted investment and respect from people around this country, and he was a spokesman in other places in the world. So he'll talk to you about what he was able to accomplish with legislation. Nobody running for office has done all of that. So I'm anxious for you to hear him and to get to know him and to understand that I can tell you as a candidate, when I was running for lieutenant governor in 2002, and I entered the race late, and nobody would have given you a nickel for me beating a sitting state senator in a primary who already had $500,000 and WEAC's and you and the AFL-CIO's endorsement, and yet we did it, outspent 5-1. Oh. Because people understand how important it is to bring integrity to our service, and now somebody who has a vision for doing it. So I'll let you listen to Steven.
Introductions, I think we can just have a beer now, right? Wow, thank you so much, Carol. Thank you, Barbara. I'm truly, truly humbled that you've taken time out of your day to be here, to enjoy some great music from Jerry. Give Jerry a round of applause.
Jerry.
Yes, no. And I'm going to come back to Jerry in a second. Jerry is someone who's really spoken to me on a deep level. But to all of you, it really means a lot. And I just want to say a big thank you, of course, to Barbara Lawden. I would not be in this race without her. She was one of the earliest people who encouraged me to do this. And she's not only a mentor, she's a model of public service to me my entire life. And she's really been my North Star. So thank you, Barbara. And to our amazing co-hosts, Carol and Pam and Joe and Courtney, thank you for all of the work you've done, not only to make this possible, but getting the word out in your networks and just sharing what this campaign is about. It truly, truly means a lot. So round of applause to our co-hosts. I also want to recognize our amazing staff. Without them, we wouldn't be here. We've got Pranav, Garrett, who couldn't be here tonight. He actually had a COVID scare, but Garrett was a big part of organizing this. So big shout out to our staff. And I also want to recognize a dear friend who's been a part of my life, and his birthday's in a few days, Bob. Happy early birthday to Bob. Carol's husband, Bob. And there's a person without whom none of us would be here today without, and that's my girlfriend, Stephanie. Thank you, Stephanie. So I want to go back to Jerry for a second, because Jerry and I had a chance to speak over the phone last night, and I was just thanking him for doing this. It really means a lot. But we're also connecting on a deeper level because I'm also a musician. I started playing the guitar when I was in 3rd grade. And music had a huge influence on this vision for politics. And you might wonder, how is that possible? These are two very different disciplines. But in just a few words, Jerry articulated the two core ideas of this campaign. He said, first, we need a politics that's about helping people who are struggling right now, people who are left out, who feel disenfranchised, who feel forgotten right now. And then I asked him, what do you think is the biggest issue that we're facing right now? And he said it's the fracturing of our society, the fact that we don't have leaders that are reaching across, who are trying to build bridges so that we can serve the greater good together. And those are if there's nothing else you take away from my remarks today, take it from Jerry. Those are the two basic ideas of why this campaign exists. And I was talking, with some of our team, that just, sometimes it can feel like the idea of being a principled, visionary leader in politics can often be put up against being a bridge builder, like you're finding some kind of mushy middle ground or the least common denominator. And Jerry, just like I hope all of you realize, is that those two things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they're part of one philosophy. It's one idea that believes in the basic humanity that all of us share and the love that we should be expressing. So thank you, Jerry, for just summing up our campaign in a few words. So a little bit about myself. I grew up in Brookfield. My parents are immigrants from India, and I would have never thought I would get involved in politics. For my parents, the correct career trajectory for my brother and I was engineering. And by the time I was getting ready to graduate from high school, it became apparent that I was likely going to disappoint my parents and get into public service. And the reason why I got there was, as I was mentioning, was music. And the reason why music was the inspiration was because I was playing in a lot of different bands in the greater Milwaukee area. And the community, as many of you know, is divided among many lines, racial, political, economic, and other lines. And I found that music was a rare force to bridge those divides. And my bands really spanned the gamut of every kind of genre you can imagine. And our band members and our audiences were like a motley crew of different people coming together. And I really saw through that, I think, one of the deepest expressions of our democracy, which is democracy at its best is when we're able to listen to each other and have conversations. If we have any jazz music fans here, you know that jazz music is all about a true call and response. And so this idea of building diverse communities to come together to serve the greater good was the basic idea I took away from music, and that is my premise and my mission for being involved in politics. And initially that was expressed through the 2008 Obama campaign. I had wanted to get involved, but I didn't know anyone in politics. My mom reminded me of that over and over and over again. But I knew I wanted to somehow be a part of making our democracy better. So I went to a local field organizing event, and an organizer said, you seem to be really passionate about what you're talking about. Do you want to be an opening speaker at an upcoming rally? And basically from that opportunity onwards, I've been on this mission to transform our politics, to make it more inclusive and more honest, where our leaders truly serve you, the constituents, as opposed to their own partisan self-gain.
Yeah, you can clap for that.
And as Barbara and Carol mentioned, I sought to express that in practice by building the Millennial Action Project, first here in Wisconsin, then nationwide, to train a generation of leaders. I think one thing you quickly realize in politics is that you can't do anything by yourself. That's in many ways the beauty of this political system. You have to be building coalitions. So we trained over 2,000 young leaders to be bridge builders in politics, to do exactly what Jerry is calling us to do, which is to be able to reach across. And the good news is that worked. That is the most practical way to make change in a democracy. We were able to make progress on some of the most pressing issues that you may think is too difficult to bridge a divide on, like taking on gun violence, or taking on climate change, or creating economic opportunity, or supporting teachers. We're able to work on all of those issues together. And so when close mentors like Barbara and others reached out and said, what about running for the U.S. Senate? To me, it was a question of where are we right now in our democracy? How do we want to show up? And are we satisfied with the options? And let me ask you here right now, raise your hand if you feel dissatisfied with the options you've been presented in politics. That's nearly everyone in the room. I don't think we've been offered the right options in politics, and so that's why I decided to jump in. And I felt in my gut it was the right thing to do, but maybe many of you have experienced a similar thing in your life when you're about to take a leap of faith. The real question becomes, do you have the courage to pursue what you think is the right thing to do? And thanks to a lot of people in this room, we're able to launch this campaign together back in August. And we launched it the right way. I believe as a mission in public service and as a musician that you have to start with the listening, and listening with a lot of humility. And that's why we launched our Dignity Tour all across the state of Wisconsin, which was essentially a series of listening events to truly hear from people, from farmers to social workers, teachers to entrepreneurs. We heard what was really on their minds, and we were able to bring that into the core premise of our campaign. And so I'm a strong believer that the new kind of politics that we're calling for is something different than what you've been seeing. The easiest thing that most candidates will do is just demonize other people. They'll say what they're against without saying what they're for. And that's profitable in many ways. You can send fundraising emails out saying this person's the like worse than the devil. You can do that. You can get people emotionally riled up. But is that going to make a difference in your life? I think we need public servants who also say what they're for. What is the affirmative case for their campaign? And that is why when we launched our campaign together in August, I committed that the #1 piece of legislation that I'll introduce in the U.S. Senate will be focused on changing the business model of politics, changing the incentives that are governing why we don't have good options in our politics, the incentives that have made it so profitable for politicians to be spewing hate and dividing us up and polarizing our society. When there's an incentive to do those things, you're naturally going to see most politicians do that. And so what we want to do is change those incentives. And at the root of that system is an issue that Barbara and I have worked on for many years, and that's getting big money out of politics and restoring integrity to our election system. Money is really at the root of this because you see politicians who too often become essentially telemarketers and used car salesmen. All they're doing is trying to find what's the easiest way to raise money because the party bosses have told them you have to make this much amount of money to even get on a committee in Congress. And so we have to deal with this money problem. It's at the root of the corruption that you see in Washington. It's also at the root of why members of Congress today often aren't even doing their job. Let me share something that I saw firsthand when I was working with members of Congress. We would sometimes be working on a bill, or sometimes I would have a meeting with them, and it would be slightly off campus. We'd be getting coffee. And maybe we'll meet at 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And the meeting wraps up, and I remember saying in one case to a member of Congress, so I imagine you'll be going back to Congress, which was this way. And she turns over to me and she says, no, actually I have to go this way. I have to walk across the street to dial for dollars from my donors for my re-election and for the party dues and all the things that are requiring money. And at that moment, I was thinking to myself, I, as a taxpayer, am paying you to do your job. And your job is that way. Instead, you're going this way. And if you're running in a competitive seat as a member of Congress, you're often spending a majority of your time raising money and dialing for dollars and not doing your job. So do we agree here today that our members of Congress should do their job that we're paying them to do? Okay. That's what campaign finance reform will look like. So that's a big part of it. But also, it's about dealing with these gerrymandered districts. Maybe many of you are following this issue. I believe we need fair maps in Wisconsin and nationwide. That is part of the incentive here. And also a big part of this is an issue that is actually sometimes an unorthodox position for a candidate in a U.S. Senate race like this to be taking on. But I believe it's important because I saw this issue up close, where members of Congress or U.S. senators, like Ron Johnson, for example, they get elected to office. And they say, well, I'm only going to serve 2 terms. And then they start to believe that they're the only ones that can do this job. They lose sight of the vision of our founding fathers that this should be a citizen legislature where ordinary people should be going into office and creating those laws, and then you leave office and live under the laws that you created. You have people like Ron Johnson who break their commitment to serve only 2 terms and continue running over and over and over again until you see Congress become so calcified, so stale, so behind. And that's why I firmly believe we need term limits on members of Congress. We were doing our listening tour. We were talking with people with disabilities who reminded us that 1 in 4 adults in America are living with some kind of disability. And they were calling on us to update the Americans with Disabilities Act because it's not enough, in their words, to not only have equal access to employment, it's also important to have equal access to enjoyment. So that's why we'll update the Americans with Disabilities Act in the U.S. Senate as a top priority. So that is what a more dignified politics looks like. And I recognize that when you hear these things, it's so easy to feel like that would be great, but is it really possible? You know, there's a lot of cynicism in politics right now, and I feel it too at times. You see what's on the news, you see what's in cable news and talk radio and on social media. It can be so divisive. You might wonder, what agency do I have to truly make a difference? Is this kind of new politics possible where we bring out the best in each other instead of feeding our darkest human impulses? Is that really possible? And what I would say to that is we've already done it. We're already doing it. And what I mean by that is with the Millennial Action Project, this movement we've been creating, we've been building it. We've seen leaders come together to, for example, pass the first bipartisan gun violence prevention bill through Congress in over 20 years. To pass a bipartisan bill to fund clean energy innovation in Congress. We have passed bipartisan bills on issues across the board, as Barbara mentioned, we had a lot of state-level work as well. We passed a bipartisan bill to end partisan gerrymandering in one of our states that we're active in. And people say that's impossible, but we did it. But the problem is more people need to believe that that's possible, and that's why I'm running in this campaign. You know, Nelson Mandela had this great line. He said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." Let's build this movement. This is possible. Look what's already happened here. Look at everyone who's shown up. I know Carol has a great card that says some of the things that you can be doing, and I know she'll speak to that.
It's coming up?
Oh, it's coming up, yes. There are concrete things that you can do. It's sharing with your networks, emailing your friends, forwarding what we're putting out. When I look at what's required to win this race, it is absolutely in our grasp. And if you believe that too, this will be a movement that will change Wisconsin politics. It will change what's going on in the U.S. Senate. And perhaps most profoundly, we will demonstrate to our children and our grandchildren that love can win in this country, that a better politics is possible. Do we believe that's possible? Let's do it. Let's do this. Let's do this. And if we do that together, we'll win this election. Thank you very much.
That's brilliant. So here goes.
Yes, and truly nothing's off limits. Yes, go ahead.
All right. When you're elected, I want you to say the top 5 Republicans you would work with and one issue you would work with them on.
Yeah, this is a great question. Who would be the top 5 Republicans I would work with? And I would include both the Senate and the House. Now, this is really important. There's an interesting culture that I see in the Senate where they believe they're the upper chamber and they don't like to work with House members, and it just reduces the collaborative process that you should have. Millennial Action Project has a congressional caucus of about 40 members of Congress that's bipartisan that would be working with. So there are a lot of members I would work with. I don't want to necessarily say there's one that's more important than the other. It's sort of like choosing some of your favorite children. But if you go to the Millennial Action Project website, and we can send you a link, you can see all the Republicans that we routinely work with. So we'll send that over to you. Thanks. Yes.
I know Barbara said that you've worked on like a ton of legislation. Of all the bills that you worked to get passed, which are you most proud of and you believe had the most impact?
Yes, great question. And I meant to say this earlier. So during the 8 years I was running MAP, Millennial Action Project, there were 200 bills that we introduced through Congress alone, 31 of which became law. The one I think I'm proudest of that really hit me deepest at the heart level was the issue of gun violence after the Parkland shooting. So let me just share a little bit of behind-the-scenes story of how this came about. So we had this horrific shooting in Parkland, and there was this national conversation about gun violence, and this also parallel narrative that it's so divisive. It's like, is there anything we can even agree on related to this? And those Parkland students, those young kids, I knew that this was going to be different because of how they were speaking about the issue. Every time a national journalist said, "Are you a Democrat or Republican?" they said, "We care about the issue, not about the party." And I said, "Oh, okay, this is different. This is a different movement here." And so we hosted those Parkland students in Congress. And we said, we want to be able to, part of why we started the Congressional Future Caucus, which was the group we had, was to help translate these incredible youth-driven movements into concrete legislative action. So we convened a group of members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, to say something very simple that they suggested to us, which is the Centers for Disease Control should be authorized and funded to study gun violence as a public health issue, which had been banned from doing that for over 25 years. And because we started with a collaborative process, we not only had a Republican in the room, we had a Democrat, and they said, okay, we're going to sign on to this together at the same time. And then, obviously, you can imagine it was more difficult for Republicans to sign on. But because we had a guy named Carlos Curbelo sign on, he gave the permission to additional Republicans to sign on. Then we had 3 and then 4. And then all of a sudden, a bunch more signed on. We had 15, 20 members join this. And then eventually, we had enough support for it to pass through committee. And then it passed through the House. It passed through both chambers. And then it got signed into law. So today, the CDC is funded to do that work. And to me, it's just a great example of what a different, more collaborative process can achieve. And to me, it's not only the right thing to do, but again, it's the most practical way to make change. And you know, I look at any of the hyper-partisan groups out there who are talking about the same issue, I just ask them, what's your scorecard? How many bills have you passed through Congress? For them, it's 0. For us, we've passed that legislation. So, thank you.
Stephen, I have a question.
Yes.
What is your focus on these unending decades-long wars?
Yeah.
Veterans that are coming back, the kids that are coming back now, that really need service, they really need people to support them in it, and government's really not doing their job with them right now. I mean, it's relying on volunteer organizations to do it.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. And this generation that's coming back, it's a whole new generation, post 9/11 veterans who are still relatively young. They're trying to figure out their careers, and they're not getting the support they need. And a lot of my friends have been speaking to me directly about this who served abroad. And I think there are two things that seem to really stand out. One is just the readjustment into civilian life and getting jobs. And one of the issues there is often the skills that you gain while serving abroad, the credentialing often doesn't transfer over. So one of the issues we worked on with Millennial Action Project was helping to connect that together. It was an initiative called Veterans Talent that helped to create a more consistent level of credentialing to help those veterans get jobs. Another big thing is coaching and training. A lot of the programs at the VA and the Department of Defense have been very outdated, and we passed bipartisan legislation to update those programs so veterans can get jobs. One I was particularly excited about was entrepreneurship coaching for veterans, which didn't previously exist. And then the other issue is just mental health. I think we have a huge mental health crisis in this country that's about to get even worse. And we have to make sure that we have more mental health providers, especially in rural parts of Wisconsin. So that is a piece of legislation that I'll strongly support. There was a mental health reform bill about 5 years ago that we did get bipartisan support. Here's to your earlier question, who are some of the Republicans? So this was an unlikely pair. Chris Murphy, a liberal Democrat from Connecticut, and Bill Cassidy, a very conservative Republican from Louisiana, who supported that bill. So those are some of the issues I think we got to work on. I think our country has to support these veterans when they're coming home, and it's a moral obligation that we do that. So thank you.
Moral obligation.
Yeah, absolutely. Questions? Yes.
So along those lines with Mike's question, mental health care workers need the education. I worked in K-12, now I'm in higher education. And a big concern with many high school students I work with is paying for college.
Right.
And we see a lot of it, we read a lot about it, and so I don't know necessarily that it falls totally on the government's shoulders, but do you have any thoughts on how to support these students to get them into education? It might be technical college, it might be 4-year, but we need a really solid workforce. As
Yes.
we boomers, some of us here, know that we are leaving the workforce soon, and our country is going to need that workforce.
Yes, absolutely. This is a huge issue, I think, that is disproportionately affecting Wisconsin, really, because we have such a changing economy here. I see we were just in the Fox Valley, talking with some manufacturers there. They're trying to set up some partnerships with technical colleges to get those workers, but there's a huge shortage. One of our supporters in this campaign is Laura Kohler with the Kohler Company, and she always reminds me how thousands of jobs they've opened at Kohler Company right now, and they're not able to fill those. So first of all, in terms of skills training, one thing I've called for in this campaign that I do believe we can build bipartisan support, and as a bold proposal, is to make technical and vocational colleges tuition free in the United States.
At technical college.
Yes.
So it will be so interesting to see what happens.
Which technical college?
NWTC.
Okay. Excellent, excellent. That's
Very
great.
affordable, but it's still tough.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's going to open the doors to a lot of people, and I think make a big difference. And related to technical training is also apprenticeships as well. I want to bring apprenticeships back. I think one thing we can do, one bill we had proposed was to incentivize employers to create apprenticeships through tax credits. So that is an opportunity as well. And then I also think for the more traditional 4-year programs, there needs to be a lot more transparency up front for students to make wise decisions, because the multi-trillion-dollar student debt crisis is not sustainable right now. And it's having an impact really on everyone, because when students have all of this debt, they're delaying the purchase of the car, they're delaying getting homes, they're delaying marriage, they're delaying a lot of things. And so it's going to help all of us if we can reduce that student debt burden. So thank you. Great question. Yes.
We're seeing sort of polar opposites in this. We have the George Floyd situation and others where people are being, police overreach. But yet, we just saw in New York officers being killed, a rookie, and gunshots in neighborhoods, bullets being sprayed everywhere. How would you approach that as a senator? And what would you do to make sure that the hardcore criminals are really prosecuted and police have the power to do that, but yet have some restraint?
Yeah. That's the middle ground that we need in when it comes to policing and criminal justice reform that I think is lacking right now. And so there are a couple proposals that I think we can get support around on that front. One is we need retraining of police officers. And I've spoken with a number of police officers so far who say they need better de-escalation training. Right now, there's a rush to violence too often, and they're not trained properly around that. And that's what they've told me. And so I definitely want to help promote, maybe it's a grant program to help provide that new training for police officers. Another thing that comes to mind that already has bipartisan support is banning chokeholds. I think that's just wrong for police officers to do. And then the third thing is creating a national system where we know more about police officers when they're transitioning from different departments. In other words, to better track the bad ones, because there are some bad apples there. And one thing that can happen is one police officer who maybe violates their code of conduct can then go work for a different police department, and they might not know some of the issues there. So creating a national system there also, I think, is very achievable and doable. And then to your broader point about, I think, the criminal justice system is, I think we're generally, our efforts are not focused on the most important things. So, for example, when it comes to like nonviolent drug offenders, locking them up and crowding our prisons with them for maybe possession of marijuana, I think is wrong fiscally and wrong morally as well. So that is a big part of our criminal justice reform, is to help people get the help they need on the front end so they're not going into prison where you have a number of compounding problems. And then on the back end of that, having real opportunities to re-enter society, maybe start a business. I serve on the board of a group in Milwaukee called The Community, which helps the formerly incarcerated population with a lot of those pre-entry and re-entry programs. And one of the biggest issues I see right now is just the dehumanization that's at play with people who are in the prison system, and I really hope we can change that. So, thank you.
Steven?
Yes.
I worked for Procter & Gamble for 29 years.
Oh, fantastic.
And back in the 70s and 80s, when I was first when I was young, basically good-paying jobs existed in those big ones. And everybody wanted to get into those kind of jobs. And what happened was, because technology was what it was, when we needed to make more paper, there was a need to hire people in those big paying jobs. Over the last 20 years or so, starting back when George Bush passed his first big tax reduction, and then carried on from that point in time, Procter & Gamble, as well as a lot of other companies, decided all we have to do is follow technology, and we'll get to the point where we don't have to employ anybody at these big wages.
Right.
They can go work for McDonald's and all these other places. Procter & Gamble in Green Bay made 50 million cases back in the day, and they had 1,700 people working there.
Wow.
Now they have less than 1,000 people working there, and they make 50 million cases. Okay. That's true of all these big companies.
Right.
So every time you talk to a politician that promises you that they're going to create high-paying jobs, they really have no control.
Yeah. Right.
They are at the mercy of businesses that are driven by stock owners to continue the process of getting to the point where they have nobody running the place.
Right.
Okay. So how is a politician in your position
Right.
going to help us understand how the whole company is accountable to actually employ people?
Yeah. Yeah. This is a great question about employment and P&G as an example of that. So first of all, you're exactly right. We don't have a lot of politicians who are honest about what they can and can't do through the legislative process. And what I would add to that is we don't have enough politicians who know what it's like to actually hire people and start something. I'm proud to be the only entrepreneur in this race who started a company and scaled it up and know what it's like to bring someone onto payroll and to pay for benefits and to know how to keep people on payroll. And those forces are real, especially during the pandemic. We definitely benefited from programs like PPP. And so what I would say is the government can help with some things on the margins in terms of when you're going through a crisis, for example, they can help employers keep their employees. There can be some tax incentives as well to help them. But there's really a broader need that I think you're speaking to, which is dealing with how technology is disrupting the workforce. And how often have we seen politicians in Congress who are totally behind on this? Like, they still think the economy is what it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. They're not prepared to talk about automation and artificial intelligence and how what a new age of manufacturing can look like. Just before coming here, we were down in Manitowoc at a company called Wisconsin Aluminum Foundry, and they're struggling. They're like all hands on deck. The CEO of the company is like on the factory floor right now, helping produce their parts. And so my belief is we need to upskill the entire economy, and we have to make sure that workers have access to those skills, so that when a certain sector of the economy is disrupted, there's a cushion and there's kind of a catapult up to the next level. If we're not paying attention to where the economy is going to be 30 years from now, then we're going to be caught in the fray, essentially. We're not going to be prepared. And, automation's real, and it's going to take up a lot of jobs. And, there are a lot of interesting conversations right now about what is the future of work really going to look like? What are we going to value in the future? One reason why we talk about a more dignified economy is because I do think we need to center things like fulfillment and dignity in work, especially in the future when there is going to be a lot of disruption. And one thing that we can do legislatively to help with that, in addition to helping on the margins with payroll, is having more portable benefits and having health care and making sure that if you lose your job, you're not losing everything. You're still going to have long-term and short-term disability. You're going to have 401k. You're going to have health care. And I've had some firsthand experiences around those things, and I believe truly it's going to increase just the ability for people to pursue more meaningful work if we have more portable benefits. So that is something we can do legislatively that can help. So, great question. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name's Jen. I've worked with low-income families for about the last 15 years. And one of the things that's really close to my heart is how do we help families be inspired to move off of government benefits when there is a consistent lure to get on them, yet the getting off is really difficult and actually tragic for a family to try and navigate.
Right.
I'm talking about the cliff effect benefits. I hope you know what that means.
Yeah. Or if you make more, then you're going to lose everything.
Yeah, the more you make, the less you get in benefits, and it causes people to just kind of retreat away from the workforce and back into the homes. And I know that a couple years ago it was to be revisited, the scale for the federal poverty levels. Can you tell me where that is at this point and how you might be able to contribute to that conversation?
Yeah. And are there particular types of benefits you're thinking of? Is it like SNAP program or?
I would say housing's
Housing,
really important, given the crisis of affordable housing, especially in Wisconsin, and the rate of homelessness. Those are also dear to my heart as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we were down in Sheboygan, and affordable housing is a big issue. And this is like a topic of conversation at the bar, or people are talking about it. And one of the issues I see in a lot of communities is the housing stock doesn't match with what the jobs are paying, and that's what creates this gap. So I think one of the things there is kind of reassessing how we're looking at the affordable housing calculation of how those benefits are flowing. But to get to your bigger issue about this kind of cliff effect, I mean, there has to be a smooth on-ramp or off-ramp. And one thing I've been thinking of, there's a really interesting conversation right now. I'm not necessarily fully supporting it yet, but around what basic income can look like. And I think what does attract me to that a little bit is it essentially says all of these programs we have right now, there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen. They're extremely complicated, and sometimes have
And they're disconnected.
And they're disconnected, they're siloed, and often, to your point, have these perverse incentives away from work. And versus if you create just a solid foundation for people that creates a legitimate off-ramp, so you're incentivized to work, which I do believe everyone, if you're able to, have some kind of work. I think that is a conversation we need to be having, which connects to the earlier conversation about automation. But since you work directly in this area, I would love to get more of your thoughts on it too. So,
We'll make a date.
yeah, that would be great. We're making the date. All right, back to Carol. Thank you.
All right. You did such a great job.
Thank you.